Welcome to Coastal with Kathryn. I am delighted. This show is going to be for the car buffs and people who want to learn more about the vintage cars. In fact, I'm going to have an opportunity to get a ride in this car. Does anybody know what this car is? Well, it's a Grand Prix car. It's from 1908. And this is going to be featured at the Concours this year at Hilton Head Island in the beginning of November, that weekend, so put it on your calendar. But I'm going to have a chance to ride in this car, and it's kept vintage and it's kept very much like this and authentic, so I'm not sure how it's all going to go, but I'm excited to have the opportunity. In a minute, we're going to inside and meet with Dale Critz, who's the president of Critz Auto, and we are going to have a chance to talk to him about the Formula Grand Prix, the history of Savannah. We're also going to learn about the German cars that are also being featured in the theme for the Concours, so there's so much to talk about. Let's get started. There is so much history that I'm excited to talk to you about because, number one, your family has been in the auto world for quite a long time.
We have.
You have.
We've been in Savannah since early 1939. We actually got the dealership in late 1938, but he opened up in January of 1939. That was my grandfather. It was called Quality Motors, Buick Pontiac, and we're still the Buick dealer. We were only the Pontiac dealer for a couple of years. And then my dad, who's still alive, is 90 years old, in fact last week, took over. He was an only child. He was 7 when they moved from Little Rock, Arkansas. And then I've been in the business pretty much my whole working life, so I've been in the business over 40 years.
So your family has seen the evolution of the auto world, haven't you?
We have.
So what brought me here today, because the Concours is celebrating 2 themes this year. One is about the Grand Prix cars,
Right.
which is something that what's really interesting about Savannah. And the other one is that they are celebrating the cars, the German cars. And obviously, well, can you tell me what kind of car I'm in right now? Because this is beautiful, everybody. I'm excited to be in his.
Well, this is a 1935/1951 Fraser Nash BMW, and reason I say slash, it started life as a 1935 Fraser Nash BMW. Fraser Nash being the British company that had a contract to sell BMWs in Great Britain prior to World War II, and which is why this car is a right-hand drive car, and it was purchased shortly after World War II by a racer. And he raced it extensively all over Great Britain and some in the continent through the late 40s and early 50s. And every time he raced it, he felt like if he could make the car just a little bit lighter, he could go faster and win more races. And so if you looked at a picture of this car in 1935, you can't tell this is what it looks like.
Really? It's just so
bare? No, it's not bare. It's bare now. It had a full body with full fenders and sort of obviously looked like a 30s car.
Right.
So this, by the time he finished making it lighter and having a little larger engine, it's essentially a 1951 Formula 2 car. And he raced against all the greats of the day. He raced against Sterling Moss, because those guys, the best drivers in the world would drive anything. They would drive a Formula 2 car and then get into the Grand Prix car, a Formula 1 car.
So I understand one of your personal passions are the German car, the BMWs, right?
Sure.
And you have a collection here.
We do, and we haven't raced this car, although this car has been raced in vintage races in the United States. But we've got a little BMW 2002, a 1974 that we've raced locally in vintage races, and also a 1965 Fiat 1000 that is a cool little car. Some people call it a clown car. It's bright green with red checkerboard on the top. Right. But it's a neat little car and fun to race.
You know, it's really funny as you're telling us your stories. When you start talking about your car, you kind of get very happy. You start to smile. You get very bright. So that's wonderful. So the other thing we're talking about is the Grand Prix, because that is one of the themes at the Concours for this season. Outside here, which we will go and visit, is one of the original Grand Prix cars. There's a lot of history with this. I was amazed to hear that the first Grand Prix was in 1908, correct?
Yep.
And where was it held originally?
So Savannah held what they call the Grand Prix of America Cup, which was essentially the first Grand Prix in the United States. It was a 270-mile race, actually 270-mile race, 10 laps around a 27-mile course. That part of which was just about 2 blocks or a block and a half from here down White Bluff. And it actually started on Victory Drive, which then was called Estill Avenue, went out east, went through Thunderbolt, went through Isle of Hope, and then down a road that was purposely built in 1908 called Ferguson Avenue. It's long and straight, and if you go on it now, you wonder why there's such a long and straight road, because it was built to get maximum speeds in 1908, and then back up White Bluff here to Estill Avenue.
I did little statistics on that, and that was really interesting. So that course that they did originally was 26 miles long, correct? Right. 32 turns, 15 laps. And how long did they complete this race in? It took them, I think it was 5 hours and 10 minutes to complete that race. And it was a dirt road too, right?
Well, that's a good point. It actually was not what we would call a dirt road. One of the reasons it attracted so many cars from all over the world was it was raced on macadam. And macadam is the forerunner of asphalt, or the predecessor of asphalt, and it was oil impregnated sand and gravel. So the road had better traction and better, in fact, I think the Italians, the Fiat team said that we came because of the wonderful roads in Savannah.
The drivers loved the track.
Yep.
They wanted to come back. There was a little bit of a pull with the Vanderbilt up in New York one year,
right.
Correct? So you did come back for that second time in 1911?
Well, there was actually 3 races, 1908, 1910, and 1911. In 08, the Savannah Automobile Club, which put the race on, attempted to ask the sanctioning body of the day to move the Vanderbilt Cup to Savannah. And there was some desire to do that because they'd had spectator injuries, and it was expensive and hard to keep spectators and farm animals and so forth off the road. Because they're racing on what was the dirt roads of the day, which were really roads for horse and carriage.
Correct.
And so while there was they gave them some love that they were going to bring the race to Savannah. In the end, they didn't do it. And Savannah Automobile Club said, well, phooey with you, we'll do our own race. And that's why they came up with the Grand Prix of America Cup, with a prize that was twice as much, and then featuring these wonderful roads.
I mean, it's really proactive. I mean, for the South, traditionally the North, they always felt was a little bit more an industrial thing going on, but in the South, to bring that kind of a prize here in Savannah, was there a passion for autos? Was this a sort of a pocket place or something? Well, I just find it so unique.
Well, obviously the automobiles were being mostly built in the Midwest. The car we'll look at later was built in Detroit, but the automobiles were nascent in 1908. I mean, they had been around for 10 years.
And the other thing I thought was really interesting, there were so many European cars here. I mean, there was Benz, Fiat, Italia. What's the one?
Renault
was there.
Yep.
What is it called? The Clement Bayard. Yeah.
Clement Bayard.
Do you know anything about that one? We're going to get Richard on in a second because he's got all that details. That was They were a bike manufacturer in Europe, I think, at one time. But
Well, a lot of automobile manufacturers
I'm
started
trying
as
to
bike
figure out where are
manufacturers.
the American cars? Where was Ford at the time?
Well, Ford was here. Buick was here. Mercer, which was has another connection to Savannah, was built in Trenton, New Jersey. Mercer was here. Lozier was here. Abbott, Detroit. Chalmers. And probably a few others too. One of the interesting stories is there was a Buick, was it in 08 or 10, was actually driven by Louis Chevrolet before Billy Durant hired Louis Chevrolet and made Chevrolet Motor Division.
You know what, one of my favorite movies was the Ford Ferrari movie. That really educated me a lot about the passion of the world, talking about trying to get cars lighter, and the technology.
You know it was filmed in Savannah, don't you?
No, I did not know
the night
that.
racing scenes were filmed on Hutchinson Island.
No kidding.
Yep.
Really interesting. Well, there you have for more Savannah. I didn't even know that. But I love that show. It's like I get that passion. And don't forget we're talking 1908.
Right.
And here we are, 100+ years later, and everybody gets in these cars and they're like a big kid. It's like this either they're happy places, and when they come into this. So we're going to pause right here because we have another car to go visit.
Okay. Let's do it. I have the steering wheel to hang on.
There's no seatbelts, right?
Yeah, well, you wouldn't want a seatbelt because if something happened and you turned over, you want to be thrown out of this thing.
Really?
Oh yeah, you don't want to be in it while it goes on top of you.
Oh my goodness gracious.
Yeah.
So this is actually, everybody, as we talk about this particular car, it is kept vintage purposely. It has not been refurbished because they're keeping it very authentic. So that's one thing I want to share, right, Dale?
Right, and the class that this car and others like it would be entered in is called the preservation class. And as I was talking about earlier, there's a movement to recognize these cars whether they're race cars or whatever, that have been kept, and kept in operation and kept the way they were. And if anything, just to sort of keep them up and keep them running. And this car will, sometimes like the Concours, they don't have a group of cars they call preservation, but they'll take a preservation winner, pick it out of the other classes. Mm-hmm. Most of the people who know these cars have seen this thing and have said, whatever you do, don't restore it.
I know.
Leave it like it is.
It really is. It's perfectly perfect,
There were two races. The race that this car raced in preceded the Grand Prix of America Cup. It was called the International Light Car Race.
Oh, really?
And so it was your car was weighed before entry, and it had a maximum allowable weight. And so this car would have been smaller than the cars.
Yeah, so during that time, what was the best car, do you think, best formula? Was it the Benz? Was it the...
So they all had...
Fiat's won the majority of the races as far as the...
Really?
Yeah.
Because driver technology?
Might have had the best driver, who knows?
The luck?
Well, a lot of it was also, would it run the whole race? I mean, would it keep running? Now, interestingly, our other car, that raced in 1911, was called an EMF, and that stood for the three guys who started the company: Everett, Metzger, and Flanders. Barney Everett, William Metzger, and Walter Flanders. But it had a nickname: Every Morning Needs Fixing, or Every Mechanical Fault. But ironically, they sent that car to Savannah, three of those cars to Savannah in 1911, and they won. They came in first, second, third because they didn't break and everybody else broke.
The winners of the races were Europeans.
All of them?
No,
Yeah.
I'm talking about the Savannah one.
The 08 race.
So-
The Vanderbilt Cup was won by Lozier, which was a U.S. car, but that was in 1911.
1911. So my question is then how do the Europeans come over here? By 1908, they have to come over by boat because they couldn't fly.
Yeah.
So this is a big deal to bring these guys over. You think about, logistics, correct?
Right.
So interesting enough, and then they brought over their cars. So,
I mean, there was hundreds of thousands of people, or over 100,000 people watching, actually. And now you think about it, there wasn't any professional football or basketball or other things. So things like, auto racing, which was new, horse racing, crew races, they were things that we don't think of today. Were big spectator sports, but they came in on the train, and people moved out of their houses to rent their houses, and it was a big event.
And I find that amazing. Again, back then, you think about how a few 100,000 people descended on Savannah.
Which had, probably 12,000 inhabitants at the time?
Exactly.
18 or something?
And how do you manage that, right? Well, again, there's so much
slept
history.
on the train.
They had cruise ships out there.
Cruise ships, too.
Oh.
They opened up the jails for rooms.
Did they opened up the jails?
Yeah, they rooms out of jail, and they parked trains in the middle of the city and had people stay on those.
I had no idea. This is how you start a car. You had to bring down the strap, open up the lid, come on in here for a second, and then what do we have to do next, Richard?
First of all, you got to get some gas
Oh boy.
and fill up these little cups right here.
Uh-huh.
You're priming.
Basically primed it
You're priming it. And then you had to do this every time you start the car?
every time.
Really?
Yeah.
So, okay. And out of curiosity, as we're getting this thing primed, I see there's the gas tank behind. How long does that last? We get this, how much time you can actually drive a car and a tank of gas here?
We don't know.
Hour,
Maybe I don't
An
know.
hour or two or something like that? Because in the Grand Prix, did they ever fill up their, after 5.5 hours going around the track?
They're definitely going to stop.
They
gotta
stopped
stop?
and filled up. They also had flat tires, and they changed tires and all sorts of things. But one of the things that you should know about that fuel system is, unlike the fuel system in a modern car, it's unpressured, so you have to pressurize it yourself. There's no fuel pump in this car, so in order to make sure the fuel gets from the tank to the engine, you have to pump that.
This is here? You have
That's
to push.
it.
So up, is that?
You can pump it.
Really?
Absolutely.
Okay, guys, here we go. Oh my word, this is great. Well, guys, this is what it's like to be in a racing car from 1908. Dale, shall we go? Here we go. Oh my God. This is amazing. Oh my word, this is great. Well, Dale, this is
little
a
easier.
very, very pretty car. Tell me, what exactly is this model and make?
This is a BMW 1600 Cabriolet, and in 1970, and it's a car that they did not import to the United States at the time, and so this was a European model that we've recently acquired, and it's actually an older restoration. It was restored about 10 years ago in the Czech Republic, actually.
As you are part of that world, the vintage and the new, but when you're looking up to purchase that kind of car, there's certain brokers that come. How does that work? If somebody's, because it's sort of a quiet world that a lot of America or the rest of the population doesn't know about.
Some of these cars that we've acquired from various sources. The one we were just in, the Willis Wonder, the 315 BMW, we bought it at auction. Although we sort of knew some of the background of the car, we bought it at an auction. This car I bought from an individual, as we have a couple of others, and
Right.
we either through friends or connections in it know about the car. The 1908 car is an interesting story, a really interesting story. A friend of ours who has a number of these World War I race cars that we show with and we go to track events with, bought that car as part of a collection of a number of cars that were all disassembled, and he preserved it. And Richard saw a picture of it online and said, I know where that picture came from. It came from Savannah in 1908. And so we called him up and said, that car needs to be in Savannah. So we worked on him for about 6 or 8 months, and he decided he would sell it to us, but made us promise, and that was one of the reasons why he sold it to us. We promised him that we would not restore it. We'd leave it as it is, and we would also drive it and use it in events like we've been going to.
Well, we're going to do a little test right now and see if you really know your cars. Well, I'm standing behind this beautiful silver car. I'm not telling you what brand it is. Can you guess what it is? And I bet you won't guess correctly because it's a sneaky car in some perspectives. It makes you think it's one, but it's not. So Dale,
right.
Tell us, what is this beautiful car?
This car is a very rare car, particularly rare in the United States. It is a 1968 BMW 1600 GT. And it was not a car that BMW bought this. BMW bought the company that made this car. In 1964, they bought a company called Gloss, which was another German automobile manufacturer that was struggling financially. And they bought Gloss because Gloss had a production facility that they wanted. And Gloss had hired Pietro Frua, an Italian designer, to design this vehicle, and it first came out in 1964. But for 68, 67, and 68, BMW put their own running gear in the Gloss body.
Right.
And they sold 1,300 of them, and I think there's like 12 or 13 in the United States, and probably only 100 or so, or 150 maybe in the world that are still around.
You know, it's really interesting. I had a great conversation with a couple of judges last year. Are you familiar with Paul Inario and his son Rob?
I've met him.
So Rob had a great expression about cars, and the ones that survive are the ones that are designed right. You know, there's all these that come forward, they test them out, but they don't stand the test of time, right? Whatever the reasons are, correct? You've introduced us to some really unique cars that you're not their traditional vintage, but these just seem to be very exclusive, or just not.
Well, Porsche, well, number one, there's awful lot, Porsche, one of the reasons why the company is where it is today is they're efficient manufacturers, and Ferrari would build 5 cars a day by hand, and back when Porsches were built by hand, they would build 60 a day. So that's why they're.
So with this beautiful car, again, as we're celebrating the Deutschland cars for the Concours d'Elegance, it's that they're just such a beautiful, and there's history in technology and success in the models. And, and so what else can you share with us?
Well, this car, like the green one, actually was owned by the same fellow, Elliot Schnackenberg, and we call him Elliot. Elliot had this car and the green Cabriolet restored about 10 or 12 years ago in the Czech Republic. This one came over, and there were certain things he didn't like. He sent it back over to redo it.
Really?
And then when he unfortunately passed away, his nephew was selling. He had a large collection of parts and these 2 cars, and a close friend of ours who is the president of the BMW Classic Car Club of America, who was the honored collector this year at the Concours, Dirk de Grin, called us and told us we ought to buy this car. And of course, being the car dealer I am, I said, well, if it's so nice, why aren't you buying it? Because he has a very much larger collection
Good
than I
question,
do.
and his question
He
was,
said, oh, I have one. So he said, you really need to
he's
own this car.
sharing. He's totally sharing. So, you know, let me ask you this. When you think of the German cars, what three things come to mind if you had to describe them over the years, you know, as we sort of close our show together? What would be your takeaway from the Deutschland cars?
Well, particularly the earlier ones, performance, but performance in a small package. Unlike the American cars, they were done they were used smaller engines, lighter cars, and then particularly the early ones, nothing that you didn't need, that was unnecessary. So they're Spartan.
They were Spartan. That's right.
But you had everything you needed, but nothing extra.
But you didn't even need a trunk space either, did you?
Well, yeah. No, you needed a boot for sometimes, but you didn't need cup holders for sure, and many of them you didn't need radios either. Because the sound, no, you needed a defroster.
Did
you
they
needed
work?
a defroster.
Did they work? Did they
Oh,
work?
the defrosters worked. Now you didn't need air conditioning either.
That's
right. But that's what I think of. I think of performance, performance in a small package because of light, high revving, high performance engines, but in a small package and nothing unnecessary.
Right. Well, that's really good. Well, it was a pleasure. Thank you very much for having us come in and talk
Sure.
about the Grand Prix and your German cars. And thank you very much for your hospitality.
Well, great.
And
We're looking forward to the Concours.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing you there as well.
We'll be there.
Thank
Okey-doke.
you.